Nobody expects to marry a monster on a Tuesday. Maya certainly didn't. When a ruthless crime boss was left at the altar, he needed a bride to save face. He pointed at her. A stranger. What she did after saying "I do" didn't just break the rules, it shattered his empire. Rain lashed against the frosted floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse lounge, rattling the heavy steel frames. Aching arches and a sharp blister on her left heel were Maya's primary concerns when the screaming started. She had spent 5 consecutive hours hauling silver trays of over-chilled oysters and champagne around the VIP suite, her feet swelling against the cheap faux leather of her required work shoes. She just wanted her shift to end so she could catch the midnight bus back to her cramped apartment. Then, a crystal flute shattered against the mahogany bar, sending a shower of glass inches from her elbow. Chloe, the bride-to-be, was red-faced and hyperventilating. Her heavy silk dress rustled violently as she backed away. "You're a butcher, Leon. You think I didn't find out about the harbor, about what you did to Samuel's brother?" Leon stood perfectly still in the center of the room. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than Maya's entire college debt. His face, strikingly handsome with sharp, unforgiving lines reflecting his Korean heritage, gave absolutely nothing away. He didn't flinch. He didn't yell. Only the rhythmic, metallic ticking of his gold watch cut through the heavy silence in the room. His enforcers, 3 men built like brick walls, shifted uneasily by the brass double doors, their hands hovering near their waistbands. "We have an agreement, Chloe," Leon said. His voice wasn't a roar. It was a low, scraping sound, like gravel under a heavy boot. "The syndicate elders expect a marriage tonight. My succession to the Western Territories depends on it." "Marry one of your escorts, then," Chloe spat, wiping a streak of ruined mascara from her cheek as she backed towards the private elevator. "I'm leaving with Samuel." When the brass elevator doors dinged and swallowed Chloe, the silence that followed was physically suffocating. The air in the room smelled of spilled gin, expensive floral perfume, and the sudden sharp ozone of imminent violence. Maya pressed her spine against the flocked velvet wallpaper, praying to blend into the damask pattern. Her dark skin and plain black uniform usually afforded her a comfortable cloak of invisibility in these high society rooms. Servers were essentially furniture to people with this kind of money. But her hands were shaking. She dropped her white serving cloth. It hit the polished hardwood floor with a soft, damning slap. Leon's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes were flat and dark. Not empty, but locked tight, suppressing a rage that made the hairs on Maya's arms stand up. He walked toward her, his footsteps entirely silent on the thick Persian rugs. Maya couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened defensively, and a sour, metallic taste of panic flooded the back of her throat. She gripped the edge of the bar behind her, her short, unpolished nails digging fiercely into the varnished wood. "You," he said. "I didn't hear anything," Maya blurted out. It was a pathetic, reflexive lie. Her voice cracked. She didn't sound brave or defiant. She sounded exactly like a 26-year-old woman who was terrified of dying in a rented polyester uniform that smelled of fried appetizers. Leon stopped 2 feet away. He stared at the crooked plastic name tag pinned to her lapel. "Maya." He didn't ask. He stated it. "Are you married, Maya?" She blinked, her mind stalling. The industrial air conditioning kicked on above them, blowing a chill across the damp sweat on her neck. "What?" "I need a wife, tonight." He checked his watch again, a sharp flick of his wrist. "In 20 minutes, actually. The elders of my family are arriving at the estate. The inheritance clause strictly requires me to be legally bound by midnight to take control of the business." Maya let out a short, hysterical breath. She looked past him at the 3 massive men staring holes into her. "I'm a cater waiter. I'm going home to eat cold pasta and sleep." "I will pay you $3 million. The number hung in the air, heavy, absurd and suffocating. Maya's mind went entirely blank for a fraction of a second, then immediately flashed to the neon-pink eviction notice currently taped to her apartment door. She thought of her mother's physical therapy bills stacking up on the kitchen counter, written in aggressive red ink. She hated herself for doing the math in her head while standing in front of a dangerous man. 3 million, Maya repeated, her voice dropping a full register. She swallowed hard, tasting bile and stale coffee. Tax-free. Victor, the largest of the enforcers by the door, let out a rough bark of laughter. Leon raised a single gloved finger, and the room went dead silent again. Tax-free, Leon agreed, his tone entirely unchanged. He pulled a silver fountain pen from his inside breast pocket, the metal catching the dim lounge lighting. It is a business arrangement. You will live in my home. You will smile for my associates. You will ask 0 questions about my work. In 1 year, we divorce quietly, and you walk away wealthy. Maya looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the sharp, expensive sandalwood cologne, he smelled like rain and something distinctly metallic, like old pennies. He was desperate, though his posture screamed absolute control. His jaw was locked so tightly, a tiny muscle ticked erratically near his ear. She wasn't a hero. She was exhausted, dangerously broke, and cynical enough to know that the world only ran on money. Survival wasn't pretty. It was pragmatic. I need $1 million up front, Maya said, her knees shaking so badly she had to lock them backward to stay upright. Wired to my bank account before I sign anything, and I want my own bedroom, with a lock on the inside. Leon's eyes narrowed slightly, just a fraction of a millimeter. Done. Ink bled through the heavy parchment of the marriage certificate. Maya stared at her own signature, the looped M looking shaky, jagged and entirely foreign. The corrupt, sweating judge named Arthur packed his leather briefcase with a greasy smile, completely ignoring the fact that the bride was still wearing a stained catering uniform and smelled faintly of lemon dish soap. The subsequent car ride to the penthouse was a masterclass in sensory deprivation. The heavily tinted windows of the Maybach blocked out the vibrant, blurry city lights. The stiff leather seats squeaked slightly every time Maya shifted her weight, which was often. She picked nervously at a loose thread on her skirt, winding it around her index finger until the tip turned purple, then unwinding it again. Leon sat on the far side of the spacious back seat, staring at a glowing tablet. He hadn't spoken a single word since she quietly muttered, "I do." Maya felt profoundly nauseous. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, heavy lump of dread settling in her stomach. She had married a Mafia boss, a syndicate leader who casually mentioned territories and elders as if they were discussing neighborhood zoning laws. When they finally arrived at the penthouse, the private elevator doors opened to a sterile, sprawling space of white marble, black steel, and aggressive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. It looked like a modern art museum where someone had died. There were no plants, no soft rugs, no photographs, just sharp edges and cold surfaces. "Victor will show you to your room," Leon said, stepping out of his heavy wool overcoat. He didn't look at her face. He looked squarely at her left shoulder. "Do not go into the east wing. Do not open your door if you hear raised voices." Maya crossed her arms over her chest, shivering in the aggressive, icy air conditioning of the massive apartment. "What if the house is on fire?" Leon paused, halfway down the hall. He slowly turned his head to look at her, his expression entirely flat and unreadable. "Then burn." He walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Maya spent the first 3 hours in her locked bedroom, sitting fully clothed on the edge of a mattress that felt like a cloud but offered no comfort. She listened. The apartment was deeply, unnervingly quiet. She didn't have luggage, she didn't have pajamas, she just had her uniform and a cheap pleather purse sitting on a velvet ottoman. Around 2 in the morning, Her stomach let out a violent, echoing rumble. Extreme stress always made her ravenously hungry. She unlocked her heavy oak door. The hallway was pitch black, illuminated only by the faint orange glow of streetlights filtering through the massive windows. Padding barefoot on the freezing marble, she found her way to the kitchen. She located an enormous stainless steel refrigerator and pulled out the first things she saw to build a sandwich. Sliced ham, sharp cheddar, a jar of artisan mustard. She was halfway through assembling it on the granite island when the heavy swinging door to the kitchen burst open. Victor stumbled in. The massive enforcer, the one who had laughed at her in the lounge, was currently hunched over, clutching his side. Thick, dark liquid was seeping aggressively through his thick fingers, dripping heavily onto the pristine white floor tiles. Squelch, drip, slap. Maya froze, her butter knife suspended over a slice of sourdough. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. Victor looked up, his face ashen and slick with cold sweat. "Boss isn't here," he grunted, leaning heavily against the counter and leaving a smeared red handprint on the granite. "Need the kit?" Maya didn't run. She didn't scream. Her brain, hardwired by years of taking care of a chaotic, reckless younger brother named Tyler, in a neighborhood where ambulances took an hour to arrive, entirely bypassed fear and went straight to deep, profound irritation. "You are bleeding on the white floor," Maya said, her voice completely flat. Victor blinked, his eyes unfocusing. He looked clearly confused by her lack of hysterics. "I got stabbed, lady. I can see that," she snapped, dropping the knife with a clatter and rounding the island. "Sit on the stool. Not the velvet one, the leather one. Where is the first aid kit?" "Under the sink," Victor wheezed, sliding onto the leather bar stool with a heavy groan. Maya hauled out a heavy metal tackle box. It wasn't a standard pharmacy kit. It looked like a portable surgical suite. She popped the metal latches, the sharp clicks cutting through the quiet room. The smell of copper was incredibly thick now, cloying and heavy, mixing unpleasantly with the sharp vinegar scent of her mustard. She grabbed heavy medical shears, a bottle of iodine, and a thick roll of gauze. "Move your hand." "You don't have to." "Move your damn hand, Victor, before you bleed out on my sandwich." He moved his hand. It was a nasty slash, deep but clean. Maya didn't hesitate. She poured a quarter of the iodine bottle directly into the open wound. Victor bit back a guttural howl, his massive frame going completely rigid, knuckles turning white as he gripped the counter. "Breathe," she ordered, threading a curved suturing needle with swift, ungentle hands. "You people are absolutely ridiculous. You live in a multi-million-dollar apartment, and you're getting sliced up like deli meat on a Tuesday night." She started stitching. She wasn't delicate. She pulled the thick black thread tight, her dark knuckles contrasting sharply with his pale, blood-slicked skin under the harsh fluorescent kitchen lights. She didn't offer comforting words. She complained. She complained about the mess, about the metallic smell, about the fact that she was wearing her only good bra, and now it was going to smell like a trauma ward. In the shadows of the hallway, unnoticed by both of them, Leon stood perfectly still. He had returned early from a meeting, expecting to find a terrified woman cowering in her locked room, crying over her lost freedom. Instead, he stood in the dark and watched this absolute stranger, this exhausted black woman he had purchased 3 hours ago, berating his most dangerous enforcer while sewing up his flesh with the bored, irritated precision of a mother fixing a torn jacket. Maya tied off the final knot with a sharp tug, snipped the thread with the shears, and slapped a heavy pressure bandage over the sealed wound. "There," she said, wiping her bloody hands vigorously on a white dish towel, instantly ruining it. She looked at the blood pooled on the floor, then glared up at Victor. "You're mopping that up before morning." Victor looked at his bandaged side, taking a shallow breath, then up at Maya. A slow, bemused grin spread across his pale, sweaty face. "Yes, ma'am." Maya turned around to grab her abandoned sandwich, and finally saw Leon standing silently in the doorway. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't anger, it was something heavier, something intensely analytical. She didn't flinch, she just picked up her plate. "If someone is planning on shooting up the living room tomorrow," Maya said, taking a bite of her sandwich and chewing slowly, maintaining eye contact, "let me know ahead of time so I can throw a tarp over the couches." She walked right past him, smelling of cheap lemon soap, expensive mustard, and fresh iron. For the first time in 10 years, the ruthless boss of the Western Territories didn't know what to say. Morning light hit the marble floors with a harsh, blinding glare that made Maya wince. She stood in the center of her newly assigned walk-in closet, staring at rows of garments that still had their price tags securely attached. She selected a dark navy shift dress. The fabric felt like spun glass against her skin, but it smelled intensely of chemical dry cleaning solvent. She ignored the row of 4-inch designer stilettos lined up like weapons on the floor. Instead, she slid her aching feet into her worn, black, slip-resistant catering shoes. The thick rubber soles squeaked faintly against the stone floor as she navigated the endless, freezing hallways towards the dining room. She checked her phone for the 4th time since waking up. A stark text message from her bank confirmed a pending wire transfer of $1 million. Her stomach did a strange, hollow flip, vibrating with a cocktail of profound relief and creeping nausea. She could pay her mother's physical therapy clinic today. She could fix the transmission on her brother Tyler's rusted sedan. She was also undeniably trapped in an apartment owned by a man who bought human beings to fulfill legal loopholes. Voices drifted from the heavy oak double doors at the end of the corridor. Deep, murmuring sounds, coated in a thick layer of forced politeness. Maya pushed the doors open. The smell hit her immediately. Rich, dark roast espresso, and the sharp, sour tang of cigar ash clinging to expensive wool suits. 3 older men sat around a massive, 10-foot glass dining table. Leon sat at the head. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the top button undone, looking utterly relaxed while radiating an oppressive, suffocating tension. Victor stood quietly in the far corner, his posture slightly rigid, clearly favoring his freshly stitched right side. Every eye in the room snapped to Maya. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "Ah," an older man with thinning white hair said. He leaned back in his leather chair, his watery blue eyes raking over Maya's unstyled hair, her plain face, and finally resting on her scuffed rubber shoes. "The bride. Leon, you didn't mention your new wife had such a practical sense of fashion." Leon didn't look at the man. He kept his dark eyes fixed on his porcelain coffee cup. "Gregory, meet Maya." Maya didn't offer her hand. She had served enough wealthy, arrogant men to know that extending a hand first was asking for a power play. She walked to the empty chair to Leon's right and pulled it out herself. The metal legs scraped loudly against the floor, a grating noise that made Gregory flinch. "We were just discussing the harbour shipments, my dear." Another man, younger and built like a middleweight boxer, said with a dismissive smirk. His name was Thomas. "Adult conversations. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the East Wing." Maya sat down. The leather chair was cold. She reached across the glass table, her knuckles brushing against the starched white tablecloth, and picked up the heavy silver coffee pot. She poured herself a cup. The dark liquid steamed, smelling bitterly of chicory. "I'm perfectly comfortable," Maya said, taking a slow sip. The coffee scalded her tongue, but she kept her face entirely blank. She set the cup down with a sharp porcelain clink. "And if you're discussing the harbour shipments, you should probably focus less on me and more on the fact that your current logistics manager is skimming off the top." The room went instantly. dangerously still. Victor shifted his weight in the corner. Thomas's smirk vanished, replaced by a hard, flat glare. "Excuse me?" Gregory asked, his voice dropping an octave. Leon finally looked up, resting his forearms on the table. He didn't speak. He just watched Maya with that same heavy, analytical stare he had given her in the kitchen the night before. "I worked the catering circuit for the waterfront district for 3 years, Maya said, keeping her voice completely level. She didn't look at Leon, she locked eyes with Gregory. "Your logistics manager, a guy named Paul with a terrible comb-over, tips the servers in crisp $100 bills every single Friday. He also rents out the VIP room at the Grand Hotel twice a month, paying in cash. A guy on a standard syndicate salary doesn't throw around unrecorded cash like that unless he's cooking the cargo manifests." She picked up a butter knife and tapped it thoughtfully against the edge of her plate. "But you know, I'm just wearing ugly shoes. What do I know?" Thomas opened his mouth to shout, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Enough," Leon said. The word wasn't loud, but it slammed into the room like a physical weight. He slowly turned his head toward Thomas. "Audit Paul's accounts, quietly. If she's right, handle it. Leon, you cannot possibly take business advice from a catering girl you bought 12 hours ago," Gregory sputtered, his composure cracking. "She observed something you missed," Leon replied coldly. "That makes her useful. Usefulness is the only currency I respect in this house." He finally turned to look at Maya. There was no affection in his eyes, no sudden romantic spark. It was purely transactional recognition. Maya held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs, refusing to look away. She realized in that exact second that she wasn't just a prop anymore. By opening her mouth, she had just made herself a player at a table filled entirely with killers. 2 days later, the penthouse was unrecognizable. The sterile, quiet halls were swarming with people. Leon was hosting a mandatory celebratory dinner for his official succession. The massive living area had been transformed into a dining hall, packed with over 50 syndicate bosses, politicians, and high-level associates. The noise was deafening. The clinking of heavy crystal glasses, the low rumbling hum of dangerous men making quiet threats, the overwhelming smell of roasted lamb, saffron, and expensive floral centerpieces. The air conditioning was working overtime, blasting frigid air to combat the body heat in the room. Maya sat at the center of the main table, her back rigidly straight. She was encased in a suffocating, custom-fitted emerald gown that dug painfully into her ribs every time she drew a breath. She hated the dress. She hated the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone like an icy chain. Most of all, she hated the way the men in the room looked at her, calculating her worth, searching for a weakness they could exploit to get to Leon. Leon sat beside her, exchanging quiet, tense words with a city councilman. He was in his element, a predator gracefully navigating a room full of lesser predators. Maya felt her anxiety rising, a tight coil winding in her chest. To ground herself, she fell back into old habits. She stopped looking at the wealthy guests and started watching the invisible people, the staff. There were 12 servers navigating the tight spaces between the tables, carrying massive silver trays of appetizers and refilling wine glasses. They wore crisp white shirts and black vests. Maya watched their footwork. She watched how they balanced the trays on their fingertips, the subtle nods they exchanged to coordinate table service. It was a chaotic ballet she knew intimately. Then she saw him. He was approaching from the far left aisle, moving toward the head table. He was carrying a tray of champagne flutes. At first glance, he looked perfectly normal. But Maya's eyes narrowed, her catering instincts flaring up like a struck match. He was holding the heavy silver tray with a full grip, his thumb wrapped over the top edge. Real servers never held a tray like that. It strained the wrist and caused spills. You hold it flat on the palm. Furthermore, He was staring directly at Leon. Service staff were trained to look at the glasses, the plates, or the negative space between guests. Never make direct, sustained eye contact. But the final detail, the one that made Maya's stomach drop completely to the floor, was his shoes. He was wearing hard-soled leather loafers. You do not work a 6-hour catering shift on marble floors in hard-soled shoes. He wasn't a waiter. The man closed the distance, stepping smoothly behind Leon's chair. He lowered the tray slightly with his left hand. His right hand slid beneath the white linen napkin draped over his forearm. Maya didn't think. There was no time to yell. There was no time to warn Victor, who was currently pinned near the exit doors by a crowd of politicians. She grabbed the heaviest thing within her reach, a thick, crystal water pitcher filled to the brim with ice and lemon slices. With a violent, ungraceful heave, Maya twisted in her chair and hurled the heavy pitcher directly at the man's chest. Crack. The heavy glass connected with the server's sternum with a sickening thud. The water pitcher shattered, sending a massive explosion of ice, freezing water, and sharp glass shards directly into the man's face. He stumbled backward, crying out in shock. His right hand jerked out from under the napkin. A silenced, matte-black pistol clattered loudly onto the marble floor. The dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Screams tore through the air. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as men dove for cover, reaching into their suit jackets. Women shrieked, pulling expensive coats over their heads. The smell of spilled wine and ozone flooded the room. Victor was there in less than 3 seconds. He vaulted over a smaller table, tackling the drenched, bleeding server to the ground before the man could scramble for the dropped weapon. 2 other enforcers piled on top of him, dragging him backward towards the kitchen doors with brutal, crushing force. Leon had reacted instantly. He was on his feet, his own weapon drawn and leveled at the doors, his body instinctively positioned in front of Maya. He stood perfectly still, scanning the panicked crowd for a second shooter. When the room was secured, he slowly lowered his gun. He turned around to look at his wife. Maya was still sitting in her chair. She was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow jerks. Her emerald dress was soaked with spilled water, and her hands were trembling so violently she had to clench them into tight fists on her lap to hide the shaking. The entire dining room fell into a terrified, breathless hush. 50 pairs of eyes stared at the new bride. Leon looked at the shattered glass on the floor, the dropped pistol, and then at Maya. The muscle in his jaw ticked. "How did you know?" he demanded, his voice a low, rough scrape that cut through the silence. Maya looked up at him. She was terrified. She wanted to throw up. But she was also profoundly annoyed that her only good designer dress was ruined. "He was wearing loafers," Maya said, her voice shaking, yet carrying across the dead silent room. "And he gripped the tray like an idiot." Leon stared at her. The cold, unreadable mask he wore for the world fractured for just a fraction of a second, revealing something dangerously close to awe. Maya slowly stood up, gripping the edge of the table to keep her knees from buckling. She looked at the blood on the floor, then locked her dark eyes directly onto Leon's. "You owe me the remaining $2 million, Maya said, her tone deadpan, cutting through the heavy smell of gunpowder and spilled champagne. "And I expect a bonus for saving your life. I do not work off the clock." She turned on her heel, her wet dress leaving a dark trail on the marble, and walked out of the room, leaving the most dangerous men in the city staring at her back in absolute, stunned silence. Did Maya just secure her place at the top of the syndicate, or did she put a massive target on her back? Leon finally realizes his fake wife is a lethal asset, but the elders won't let this disrespect slide. What do you think Maya should demand next from the boss? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe to catch the next explosive part.